About a week or so ago, both my video editing software and my laptop gave out. So I had to go out and buy a new laptop and video editing software. Now, the software was an upgrade of what I had been using, but I had a great deal of difficulty trying to make the green screen effect work. I'd already recorded it on a video camera and I was kind of stuck with that. I played with it for a long time and just couldn't get it to work, but I did try to make it more interesting. I have a effect on it that my grown-up daughter told me looks disturbing, but I thought it was interesting. In either case, I'm sorry for the poor production value of this video. Hello, welcome to this channel, which is devoted to a reading and better understanding of the book Ascent of Mount Carmel by St. John of the Cross. In this chapter, St. John discusses the third kind of things related to the senses from which our wills might take joy. These are the things that St. John already wrote about in the first book, and they're the things in life that we apprehend via the senses. And they also include our imaginary reflections that use and reformulate our memories of these things that we might have experienced with our senses. In the first book, St. John instructed us to enter into the dark night of the senses, and we did this by withdrawing from the things that take our attention away from God. In doing this, we were guided by faith and not the senses. In this chapter, St. John isn't just talking about self-deprivation. The emphasis here is on mastering our wills. We're withdrawing from having desires for these things of the senses. To darken the will and purge it of rejoicing with respect to these sensible objects and direct it to God by means of them, it is necessary to assume one truth, and that is that the sense of the lower part of the man is not, neither can it be, capable of knowing or understanding God as God is. As we discussed in past chapters, we can't try to approach God through our senses because nothing of the senses can compare to Him. Eye hath not seen nor ear heard, neither hath it entered into the heart of man. The senses may receive pleasure and delight either from the Spirit by means of some communication that it receives from God interiorly, or from outward things communicated to them. Neither by way of the Spirit nor by that of the sense can the sensual part of the soul know God. St. John tells us that it's actually vanity to take joy and pleasure from any of these types of apprehensions, because it hinders the power of the will from occupying itself with God and from setting our rejoicing upon Him and Him alone. Therefore, we should try to remain in darkness in this regard. Here again, we're seeking a tranquility where we are somewhat withdrawn and not subject to a roller coaster of passions and senses. However, in this chapter, St. John does provide us with a very important exception. If the rejoicing of the will were to rest on any of these things, it would be vanity. But when it does not rest upon them, but as soon as the will finds pleasure in that which it hears, sees, and does, it instead soars upward to rejoice in God, so that its pleasure acts as a motive and strengthens it, and to that end, this is very good. St. John is not explicit here, but it seems that he's talking about all the things of the senses that we've talked about in prior chapters. And these include the use of imagination during prayer. So, it's okay if we take momentary pleasure in something of the senses or the imagination, as well as all the supernatural phenomena of the senses that we've discussed, if we don't rest upon them. If we don't rest on them, they can be profitable when we quickly move on from them and then set our rejoicing on God in devotion and contemplative prayer. As we've discussed in prior chapters, even when we're at the point of contemplative prayer, we'll never completely abandon meditative prayer. There are souls who are greatly moved by objects of the sense. Now, if you're struggling on where the jumping off point should be for you, this would be a good thing to discuss with a competent spiritual director, assuming you can find one. Since St. John tells us that a great deal of discernment is needed in this regard, and the resulting effects must be considered. St. John cautions us. Oftentimes, many spiritual persons indulge in the recreations of sense aforementioned under the pretext of offering prayer and devotion to God. And they do this in this way, which must be described as recreation rather than prayer, and which gives more pleasure to themselves than to God. And although the intention that they have is toward God, the effect which they produce is that of recreation of the sense, wherein they find weakness and imperfection. St. John gives us a test to determine whether any of these things of the senses can be profitable or not. And it is that whenever a person hears music or other things and sees pleasant things and is conscious of sweet perfumes or tastes that are delicious or feels soft touches, if his thought and the affection of his will are at once centered upon God, and if that thought of God gives him more pleasure than the movement of the sense which caused it, and save for that he finds no pleasure in the said movement, this is a sign that he is receiving benefit therefrom, and that this thing of the sense is a help to his spirit. So these things of the senses might be okay if the only pleasure we receive from them is that they lift us closer to God and we're better able to love Him by them. We need to be cautious and not deceive ourselves. We shouldn't convince ourselves that we are using these things of the senses to bring us closer to God, while at the same time we're resting on these things and actually feeding upon them. When we see that the desire of these things are constraining us and reining us in, we should consider mortifying them. The greater the hold the thing has over us, the greater of a concern it is. So if we determine that it's appropriate to make momentary use of certain sensual things to achieve a spiritual act, we shouldn't desire those things of the senses, and we shouldn't take much account of them, even if we do associate them with God. And after we've taken momentary use of them, we should withdraw from them immediately and set our will on God. Any desire for the thing or things of the sense should be immediately forgotten as we enter into contemplative prayer. Well, I hope you enjoyed this installment. I'm sorry it's been a couple weeks since the last one, but I went off on a tangent on the New American Bible videos. But we should be back again in about a week with another one. In the meantime, please pray for the church.
Yield not to temptation, and let no one lead you astray. So many times